Welcome to Mastering CS Candid Leader Insights, the podcast where we deep dive into the world of customer success with industry leaders. I'm your host, Irina Chismash, and today's guest is Renata Pinheiro, VP of Customer Success at Zaptic. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly.
It's absolutely fine. It's Pinheiro, but you did a really good job.
Okay, thank you. Renata, welcome. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us today. I always start the interview and this discussion by getting to know a bit the guest. So what I know about you is that you've been deep in the high growth tech startup world. So I'm curious what inspired you to focus on customer success and how has your approach evolved over time?
It's a great question. I've been working with customers my whole career, right? So I had a bit of an atypical start in the sense that I did biology at university and wanted to do science and help cure diseases and things like that. But I realized I really missed when you're in the lab working with people. And then when I left uni, I pivoted into market research and ended up in essentially what was called account management at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with various big agencies and FMCG companies in what used to be in the back in the days what was customer success in traditional businesses, right? And then when I pivoted into tech, I found out that customer success was essentially how you engage with customers in the tech environment. So it was a natural evolution of my role, and really never looked back because I've loved tech. I'm now on my fourth tech startup, and customer success has been the path that made most sense for where I work. And a lot has evolved in my approach. Like you learn so much over time, and the environments that I work in are almost like accelerated growth because tech businesses are trying to do and startups are trying to do so much in such a condensed period of time. So how you view customers, the flexibility you need to bring to your approach, how you deal with the challenges, how you deal with people, all has changed, right? As you learn. So I think it's a really exciting career.
Not sure how is your experience, but often the CS leaders are struggling in startup environments. And I'm a strong believer that you need a set of skills to be able to perform in a startup versus more established company or even a company that went above the 1 million ARR threshold. I'm curious, how was your experience? And not sure if that was your case or not, but why do you think customer success often takes a backseat in early stage startups? Was your experience similar or you were luckier in the startup you've worked with?
So not as lucky as I have wished, but I've been very lucky in the startups I worked for, of course. It's an interesting thing, right? Because when you're setting up a business, your first focus after you figure out what your offering is going to be is I need to see if anyone's going to pay for it, right? Because everyone has good ideas, you might have good tech, but if you can't find market or product market fit, it's not going to go anywhere. So a lot of early stage startups are focusing on that customer acquisition, on that sale, right?
Mhm.
And because that's what then helps drive growth, helps drive investments and valuation, that starts first at top of the funnel and sale. And then unfortunately, more often than not, customers become, because they come at the end, you start aggregating customers, they become an afterthought, right? So my first advice when I'm talking to companies is like, whenever you think you need to start looking at customer success, you probably should have started 6 months ago, right? because because there's a lot that needs to be done there. And more often than not, founders are really good at selling their products because they're so involved during the stage. So you could actually come in from an angle of you don't need the sales team until you hit a certain threshold of awareness, and you need the CS team before you need a sales team. It is a very biased perspective, of course, because I'm from CS and I think this is the way, right? But it tends to be that startups bring in someone in CS when they either have a lot of churn, right? They have too many customers and they can't then diversify across the people that are there. So it has to be a problem first, and you then have to play catch up because you have to fix the problems. Some problems are a little bit too late to fix, and
Mhm.
you have to then set up a good way. So the earlier you start thinking about it, the less likely you are to find yourself in a problem scenario that you need to rescue, right? But it stems from the sale need.
You tried to position on if we envision a timeline, you somehow set the mark for when should we think about CS. I want to ask you what makes a company truly customer centric and how can startups build that mindset from the very beginning? Because I often hear that label that customer success, it's not a role, it's not a function, it's more like a mindset. So, in your perspective, what makes a company truly customer centric?
Yeah, and that's interesting, right? Because I think it's both. I think there is the philosophy of customer success, which is everyone's job is essentially customer success in one way or the other. But then you also have the function of customer success, right? And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Customer
Mhm,
centric businesses are very different, right? And again, I don't think there's just the one way, but the questions I think you need to be able to answer well are, how often am I thinking about the value that this is going to bring my customer, my future customers? Because we work for our own business, right? So the business that we work through is the majority of our day. So I'm always thinking about Zaptic, right? You're always
mhm,
thinking about Custify. How often are you
mhm,
thinking about how, if Custify wants to do something, why would a customer care? How well do I know my customers? Am I thinking
mhm.
about how this is going to bring value or benefit them before it benefits me? So, and how often am I talking to them? Because sometimes what you find is in early stage startups, you talk to your customers a lot. And then as you grow, you talk less. But you assume that your knowledge from when you were a seed is still valid from when you were a Series A. And customers evolve, the industry evolves. So it's those questions that then give you that customer centric mindset, right? It's not just I want to sell more or I want them to use this feature or I want them to open my marketing newsletter. And I was like, oh, how are you gonna do something that's gonna make them want to engage with you? And I think that drives customer centricity. I also think that it's not always possible to be customer centric. It's a little bit like healthy eating. You
Mhm,
everyone wants to be healthy eating, but sometimes it's not possible because you're
mhm,
very stressed and you have bigger problems and I'm gonna get it going. And owning that is better than pretending you're a healthy eater and lying about it.
mhm.
Sometimes you have to pivot and be sales led or product led. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just owning that, and saying, because we are a sales led business right now, we are going to have to do this and we're not going to do this. And if this happens, this is how we're going to deal with it, as opposed to pretending you are not, you know?
Well, when you mentioned the parallel with the healthy eating in marketing, we used to have it, I think, almost 20 years ago when social media was a hype and everybody talked about it. It was a buzzword and everybody wanted to do it, but nobody knew exactly how to do it. So, and I resonated. And also, you mentioned about things that you constantly change and evolve, but when it comes to the customer, the industry, the challenges. I can second that from my role as a marketer because what we did define an ICP, we did define our product market fit. But through the conversation that I constantly have with CS, I realized that what was relevant 6 months ago or 1 year ago, it's no longer relevant. Where things need to be adapted or put it in another view. So even if I'm actively promoting the CS, but not on a day-to-day operations, I do see this also from marketing. And speaking about that balance that you need to have in, especially in a startup, how do you balance the urgency of product development and the sales with the importance of customer success?
I love this question because I actually think they are the same thing, right? So you cannot have good sales without good customer success, right? They're two sides of the same coin because sales is difficult. Getting a customer in, in particular in this market, please give me money, right? It essentially is difficult. But then from the moment they start, how do you make sure that they stay and then they grow, which is more sales, is all tied to that same journey. And then product development is very much on that balance of like, what is it that we're doing that's going to bring value to all of our customers, and how are we prioritizing it? Most companies have a limit somewhere, right? You can't build everything to everyone. And it's about managing customer expectations from prospects to renewals. And if you do it well, if you have that customer centric mindset, if you have those good conversations, you can actually get them to partner you and understand on your product development. So it doesn't have to be everything now, right? Sometimes customer ask for things that they don't think that they think they need that they don't need. They ask for things that they want, but you can give it to them in a different way. And that's why the partnership across those three is not either or. Is like if we have a customer asking for this and a prospect asking for that and the renewal asking for this, and how do we unify it, right, and drive that cohesion.
How do you say no to a customer, especially when you cannot implement his feature request? How do you communicate it in order to keep the relationship alive after the moment of no, it's not possible? How do you set up the right expectations? How do you navigate those type of conversations?
I think it's such a crucial skill in CS. It's very easy to be liked by your customer if you're saying yes to everything,
Yeah,
right? But you then create a problem further down the line because at some point you're gonna have to set that boundary. So
yeah.
doing it early, doing it well is so important because it sometimes we feel like if we say no, the customer is gonna be unhappy and therefore you're failing at your job, and that's the wrong mindset. Like you have to set a good, healthy relationship. It's not,
Mhm.
one side sucking everything from the other. So with feature requests, it's about being able to explain why. Most customers are very reasonable. They will have things that they have been asked to do that they can't do. So everyone understands, I would love to be able to do this for you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we cannot. And here is why our roadmap is this way. We have prioritized these other features for you. We're working on this instead. This is how what we're doing will also benefit you, right? And therefore, if this is still important, we can review it at the next available slot. Or if they want us to do something that is completely out of, imagine I was a Custify customer and I wanted you to solve my support problem, right? And you're like,
Mhm.
well, that's not what my tool does. Here is how you can help. Maybe go look
Mhm.
at, maybe try and we can integrate and you can try and help them in another way. But the earlier you are honest with them, explain to them why, explain to them what you're doing instead, how they're going to benefit from it, the better.
If I would have wrap it up, what I heard from your answer was be transparent, be honest, and communicate. So, transparency, honesty, communication as a skill set, but also try to find indirect or alternatives for their solutions. And maybe I would also add try to understand why they need what they need, because in some cases, what I noticed is that only by asking the why questions and actually understanding the pain or the need, you realize that maybe that particular feature the customer wants it does not solve their need, and there's another way.
Yeah,
And yeah, I wouldn't call it necessarily a workaround because I think it sounds work as a negative connotation. But there are, I like to say it in design, there are 50 shades of the gray color without making any connotation. But so it's not always black or white. So we see it when we have a conversation, there are a lot of gray shades in between, and you can actually navigate this part.
and the why should always be done before you reject, right? If you say I'm not doing that without understanding why, it comes across negatively. So you need to understand why, because before you tell them no, if you can think of another alternative, that's how you're gonna know. But let's say they're asking for something and you understand the why and you know it's not something you're gonna do because it's completely disaligned with your vision, right?
Mhm.
And then you can explain why. And is also about finding out what other value are you giving them instead, you know? So going back to the food analogies, like, no, you
Yeah.
can't have French fries, but you can have mashed potatoes,
Yeah.
which is still potatoes and it's still very yummy, you know?
I want to talk about teams and the way you structure it. And I know that you have different experiences. How does a team change when the company changes? And now I'm thinking of different stages
Mm.
from startups growth, seed, series A, series B, for sure, the structure, the roles, the responsibility, the dynamic into the team does not remain the same. So how should we start when we are in a startup with no investment? What changes when we have a seed, series A, series B
Mm.
in terms of team dynamic and structure?
I'm going to give some general recommendations, but with the caveat that every startup is different. And how you should figure this out is based on what your product offering is, the industry you're operating, and the customers you're going after, right? So that's like the trifecta, and that determines how you set everything up. Okay, but there are some general things that can apply. Like before, because I don't want people to think, oh, this is what I need to do. Think about your product, think about your industry, think about your customer, and that will
Mhm.
set up customer success. But generally, when you start small or you start from nothing, you need a generalist, right?
Okay.
Because you're going to have one person, if you're lucky, maybe two people, and they need to be able to do an okay enough job across everything that comes after the contract signs. Right. So
Mhm.
it's a 360 role. You're still probably figuring out where exactly the responsibilities are. So the generalist can go, I'll pick this up, I'll pick that up. And someone that is relationship driven, because you're less likely to have the tech stack at a seed
Yeah.
stage, an
Mhm.
investment, right? So you
Mhm.
start with that, and in that stage you're figuring out what is it going to work with our customers, what do they expect, let's try a few things out, where is it there are value moments, and you're also mainly reactive to the customer needs, right? When you
Yeah.
bring in a round of investment, you can then start bringing a little bit more structure, where you might then start most often separating support to success, right? Where you go, okay, I might have more customers now, they have support, I have success. You start having some metrics, right? And you can start shaping what I call your bedrock processes, which is the thing that always happens, like sales to CS handover, always happens everywhere, right? Onboarding, whatever it is, if it's technical, it always happens everywhere. So these are things that you can start going, okay, what is it that we need to do to have a good experience? And then obviously, as you bring in more investment, you can specialize roles, then you can start splitting into onboarding, success, support, technical account management, services. If you have services, you bring in good tools to bring you data, because data is going to help you drive decisions. And then with more data, you can drive prediction and automation. And when you get to a certain level of customers and ARR, usually you then need to segment, because you can't treat everyone equally. You need data to be able to leverage it and scale, right? And then usually by the time you're getting to Series B, you know more or less your journey, your structure, your scale, and then you're just about, how do I automate it? How do I make it more efficient? How do I scale it everywhere without having a one-to-one increase on headcount, right? So it takes that kind of shape usually.
I've heard it where we had several debates with the CSMs I've interacted. Industry expertise skill, or how important is it? Do you have CSMs that are rock stars in particular industries, and when you move them from industry to industry, they are basically lost?
As with most things, it's not an answer that is clear cut. It depends on your industry. Some industries, if you have industry experience and you want to move into CSM role, is super valuable, right?
Mhm.
So I was talking to someone the other day, and they work in this business that deals with recruitment. So their customers are recruiters, and if you have been a recruiter, you can bond,
Yeah.
right? Like, then you have that benefit of, if you're recruiting from the industry and you're selling to that same persona, it's very
Mhm.
quick to bond. But then you have to be able to educate them on what CS is, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes it's easier to educate on the industry than educate on what CS is. So you have to decide for your product and your industry and your customer base, what is easier for you to teach. Some industries are easy to learn. Some industries are very hard. And that's where I think you should make the call.
I think I really love your answers. I also noticed it from and I'm going to make an analogy with the marketing. I always said a few years ago, I went to an interview as a marketer, as a FMCG company. And honestly, I couldn't, even if it was called marketing, I couldn't understand. And the way they were doing. So the fact that it's marketing or CS, it means totally different things. And I understand why you mentioned and you said the triangle, the product, the industry, and then the CS, because it's very important. And when you were explaining the differences, I realized that even if you know the industry and you say that, okay, I'm going to be a rock star, well, yes, you have part of the thing solved, but you have other
Yeah,
challenges. And if you do not know the industry, okay, it will be a challenge at some point, but at least it will be easier on others. So there's no role in which you step in free of challenges. And it's like, okay, nothing happens along the way.
exactly. And it depends also what you expect from that role, right? So if
Mhm.
you have, sometimes a more junior role can
Yeah.
go by without the industry expertise, because they're going to learn and you need it from a more senior role. Some companies is the other way around. It's okay if the senior person doesn't understand the industry, because I want them to know what good marketing looks like. And they need to come in and set up good marketing, and the team that's already there knows the industry enough. So you have that balance. So that's why I'm like, it depends on your business offering, your industry, and your customers. What is it that you're bringing to the table, and what do you need from a hire? That's what would decide, do I need industry? Do I need sector? experience.
We started the conversation by asking you, why do you think CS usually isn't seen as it is supposed to be, at least in startups? Now, I want to ask you, how have you made CS a real revenue driver in the companies you've worked with? And I ask you this because I usually, or at least the CEOs with whom I talk, if you manage to prove that you are a revenue driver and not a cost center, they are more open, or they listen, they are more willing to listen, actively listening what they are saying. Because in theory, everybody listens. In practice, only to come up with an argument.
It's tied a little bit to the customer centricity, right? So where you have businesses where are less customer centric or more sales led, being able to have the attribution to revenue is what gets people listening, right? So my advice is understand the type of business you're in. If you're more customer centric business, you by default need to justify it less because that business understands if we don't have this team, there's no way we're customer centric and we have this huge problem, right? It's always beneficial to still be able to attribute, but it's less of an uphill battle. Whilst if you have a product led organization, attribution is like, how can I bring value to our product evolution? And then you start going around feedback channels, you can create communities, you can connect to product, you can do beta testing. Like there's a lot of things you can do as CS to facilitate that product evolution. If you're sales led, it's around where is the space for me to generate and attribute revenue? I've worked in businesses that CS has no revenue target, right? And I've worked in businesses where they do. And even when you don't, you can still prove sales value by finding leads and making introductions and giving opportunity to sales. And obviously, where you do have the revenue target is making sure you hit those targets around the renewals or the expansions and upsells, whatever that is. But first identify what kind of business you're working with and then see how you can bring value that you can easily communicate and attribute to what your team's doing based on that business type.
What I really like is the fact that you made this difference between sales led and product led organizations, and the fact that we don't have a general set of KPIs that apply to customer success. And I remember a conversation I had a few weeks back where the head at CS had no churn. Churn was not a problem. So they really had zero churn. And I was like, this should be the dream job. But then I realized that, well, churn is not an issue. Other were challenges, and I'm gonna release the episode.
Oh, I would love to see it. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
pretty soon. But everybody knows that okay, CS should own the renewal, the upsells should have a revenue target associated. But let's speak about the other KPIs that are equally important, and they might impact a CS team in other type of organizations.
if I was gonna pick the one KPI for CS, is definitely net revenue retention because I love it
Okay.
because it's the bucket
Yeah.
of everything, right?
Yeah.
And also because particularly in startups, net revenue retention is really good for investors, right? Because it
Yeah.
shows how much do you keep and grow your customer base,
Yeah.
and growth from customers is really important for startups. So definitely
Mhm.
have it. But in terms of others, whatever your product is, what is your engagement metric, right?
Okay.
And that engagement is the usability of it, right? Because we know if you sell something and people don't use it, why would they? At one point, someone's gonna ask, why are we paying for it? It might not be in year one, it might not be in
Okay.
year two, but at
Yeah.
some point they're gonna go, why are we spending money on this? It's the equivalent of having a gym membership that you never go to, right?
Exactly.
Some
Yeah.
point you're gonna go, do I really want to spend that money in the gym? Because maybe I'm never gonna go. And that's a really good leading indicator of are you providing value? Now, it's not a replacement of it because just because someone uses your product doesn't mean they're getting what they want out of it. But we definitely know if they don't use it, they're never gonna get anything out of it. Right.
Mhm.
So it's around, and you can name things like you can have NPS or CSAT or effort scores or adoption rates, feature functionality. It depends on how your product is built, right? But I would suggest figure out what is your engagement and adoption metric, and figure out how does that tie to tangible outcomes.
Well, you also mentioned about sending leads to sales or making introduction. I'm curious, how do you do that? What's the process? What's the framework?
So have you heard of what? Well, marketing would have had is like it's a CSQL, right? So
Oh,
it's a
okay.
CS
Hmm.
qualified lead. Essentially, different
Hmm.
businesses can set it up with whatever criteria they want, but it could be that as a CSM. I've just had a QBR, and they talked about the fact that they are bringing in a new team, and that new team
Okay.
is out of contract, or they might be exploring a new use case, and that use case is out of contract, or they might be going through an acquisition, right? So
Mhm.
as you're engaging with the customers, you might be hearing these things that that either as a system go, hey, this is interesting. Can we talk about that? Or you can go,
Okay.
hey, salesperson who looks after this account, Martin mentioned today in our QBR that they're acquiring Banana Inc. Right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's worth you syncing with him and figuring out, because we might be able to offer the same thing to Banana Inc. And it could be a restructure. So it's things like that that you can then either progress to a certain point and qualify yourself, depending on the business, or you immediately hand over to sales to progress and qualify themselves.
I want to close the business side of things by asking you what advice would you give to a tech startup CEO who is just beginning to build their customer success function?
Mm.
What do they need to take into account? What should they avoid doing?
Oh dear. I mean, I always probably started earlier before thinking about it, but you don't have the ability to time travel. Particularly in tech startups, the CEO sets the tone for
Mhm.
how people are going to be thinking about it, right? So the more that they can keep the customer engagement, either directly or through engaging with the team, so they understand what customers are doing, the more that they can bring the mindset of what is it that we're doing that delivering actual value
Mhm.
to the customers now, right? As opposed to thinking in the future, the better. And to a certain extent, it's always very helpful to know that senior leadership is grateful for what CS is doing, because when CS works well, things don't go wrong, right?
Mhm.
And it's sometimes difficult to remember that because things are not going wrong, people are doing their job really well, right? But when CS goes badly, everyone knows, right? Because you
Yeah.
have feedback, churn, complaints, and things like that. So that would also, I think, drive a lot of recognition, attribution to the value that a team like that brings. But so, in summary, if you can foster a customer mindset,
Mhm.
from the CEO, help make sure that you're setting up a good journey that delivers value, give the recognition for the work, because when they work, nothing bad happens.
Because you do have experience in on the tech side, I wanna and you somehow mentioned when you said that startups, okay, do not have the foundation for proper tools, at least at the beginning. I want to speak about the technology role and how do you leverage technology when it comes to scaling, and what's your advice on when should this part be introduced? At what point you realize that you can no longer work, and what are the signs?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the technology tech stack and when you introduce it, how you introduce it, how do you pitch internally for it?
So I always think as soon as you can afford a customer success platform, you should pitch for it. Right? So with the first substantial round, and I've always pitched for it by going, if you give me this software, I can probably save on headcount. Right? But if
Okay.
I don't have a software that enables me to have the data in one place, to automate it, to track health scores, to understand what's going on with our customers, to have triggers, I'm going to need more people. Right. So, and usually a software is more expensive, is less expensive than a person. But you have to also be mindful of what is the business capital situation. So it tends to be
Yeah.
when you have your first either seed plus or series A, you have enough cash to be able to
Okay.
afford softwares. But some startups are more fortunate to be able to afford it earlier. Right.
Hmm.
Always recommend not to use the CRM, because the CRM is for sales, and it's like trying to fit someone else's shoes into your feet. It's like it kind of does the job, but it's not comfortable, and I don't want to walk very long in it. So that is my recommendation. So from general tech stack, there is a CSP. If you have a substantial support need, you might have a support software as well as a
Hmm.
minimum, and they should integrate. And then obviously your CSP should integrate with your CRM. So then there's seamless communication across all of it, because you don't want to create silos, right? Yeah, in terms of when to bring it, we covered it as soon as you can afford it, to be honest. But early stage, you can probably keep generic information in a spreadsheet, like the number of accounts, your AR, your renewals in Google Drive or in Microsoft Drive, but it starts getting very messy. So by the time you hit double digit customers, you should definitely start thinking, okay, where am
Yeah.
I logging this information, right? And how do I make it accurate? other softwares are very dependent on your offering. So some companies have a community software if you're the type of industry that values community. Some customers might have project management type softwares if you're doing a very heavy delivery on onboarding flow process, right?
Mhm.
So I would say bring the minimum amount of software that you need to get the job done, because you don't want your teams to be straddling multiple softwares, and they should always be able to talk to each other.
Those are very good advices, and you actually mentioned some of the pains that I know that CSMs do have. They are often pushed to work in CRMs. They are usually doing a lot of workarounds, and at some point the car breaks and it's no longer and it's no longer working, or it becomes so heavy to maintain the whole system that you built. Where if there's and usually there's one person, the champion, who basically built that whole thing, and when he or she leaves, everything falls apart. There's also one other aspect. What I noticed is that in some cases people do hurry up into the process of buying the tools, but they don't have the processes.
Mm.
So they actually end up in front of a tool, and it's like, and now what? Because the tool cannot solve. So the tool leverages and gives you leverage and enables you to do something, but it doesn't do the job for you. So only by just buying a tool, you won't solve the problems. So I think it's one of the things that I want to say very clear, that a tool is only part of the problems. So it's a condition that helps you pass the exam, but it does not guarantee you
And
that.
it that's exact, and that's with every tool, right? Sometimes
Yeah,
people
exactly.
oversell the benefit of a software, but with any software, with any tool, anything that you have, like if you don't know what you're gonna use it for or how it's gonna benefit you, why are you getting it? It's like I would like. I mean, like I can think of so many analogies, but even things like I'm gonna get, a shovel. But if I don't have gardening, what am I gonna do with the shovel? And if I don't know what I'm gonna plant, then why do I need a shovel first? So it's kind of like even that. But I do think that sometimes people go the other way as well, and they go, I don't need the tool because I can manage with Excel or
Exactly.
whatever, and then you're making things a lot more complicated than it needs to be. So I always think about earlier around the tooling, because you can then scale with the tool, right?
Mhm.
But you need to know what you want the tool to do for you.
Because we need to somehow wrap up our conversation. I have two more questions for you. I want to ask you, what are you most proud of in your CS work, and what keeps you excited about this field?
Well, that's easy because the thing I'm always most proud of is the teams I built and the people I've worked with. I think CS is an incredibly challenging environment to work with, because you're dealing with people, and people are people. They change every day. They are emotional, they're ever demanding, so you're there on the front lines dealing with all kinds of people, and creating teams that achieve success, and you come together and do something really good. Like there's no better moment than having a team get really strong feedback from a customer, having a customer really partner with you because you're delivering value, right? But you can only do that with the team. So the answer is a 2 for 1. Like really proud of my teams. Really enjoy, reaching those moments of you've made a difference in that person's day. You know, you've helped them think about something they hadn't thought about. You've made them, approach something differently by how you've engaged with them. You've helped them in some way, and it's almost like little treasures you can collect in your career. Those are great.
Speaking about that, I listened to the podcast earlier this morning. It was about the NLP, and it was one thing that the job of CS person, a CS or a support, it's usually like coach or like therapist, because basically you end up with all the things or with all the problems, or you reach out to them when okay, things are not working, or things are not. And yeah, team is super important. It's one of the things that it can help you, or on the other side of the things, it can slow you down if you don't have the proper team.
Yeah. I've been very fortunate working with amazing people. So
If there's one key takeaway about CS that you would want our audience to remember from this conversation, what would it be?
how am I supposed to pick one, Irina? I'm not entirely sure. Um, for people who work in CS, the biggest takeaway I would always advise you is to resist the temptation to fix everything,
Mhm.
right? Resist the temptation to say yes to everything. Resist the temptation to sacrifice yourself and your boundaries to do things, because particularly in startups, yes, ends up being a bit of a catch-all, right?
Mhm.
That does not mean that that's the thing that's going to make the impact, right? So what is it that you're going to do today or this week or this month that is going to be moving that needle, right? Moving that needle for your business, moving that needle for your customers. And that's what you should focus on, which will definitely not be everything.
Renata, thank you very much for all the insights that you shared with us today. A big thank you to everyone who listened to us. And until next time, stay safe and keep mastering customer success. Bye bye,
Thank you.
everyone.